Hello, welcome to Careers and Coffee Season 2. This is a kind of LinkedIn Live podcast series where Charlotte and I join each other kind of each week over a cup of coffee and talk all things career. So, Charlotte, before I continue on to today's episode, do you have your cup of coffee ready?
Of course I do, Lucy. I am coffee ready.
Good. Cheers. I've also tried to match it.
I love that
Cheers.
you're trying to make this accessorizing with your coffee cup a thing.
I know I'm gonna have to go and buy some more kind of coffee cups. If anybody wants to sponsor us with any coffee cups, please do get in touch. So today we are going to be continuing on the theme of having our kind of special guests who are SMEs, expertise in their field, talking about an array of topics. So that could be anything from a specific skill set or an experience to kind of really having that SME knowledge. Today, we're going to be talking about this is going to be probably one of my favourite episodes. I'm kind of putting it out there already. Today, we're going to be talking about grit and resilience. And I am absolutely so excited about this episode today. And we are joined by Rachel McAvoy. So Rachel is a deeply experienced strategic, I can't say my words recently, can I? Strategic leader with 2-decade career as a senior marketer. Across growing brand affinity, driving business growth for global healthcare, health tech, and well-being businesses. So, enough from me. I'll bring Rachel onto the stage.
Hi, Rachel.
Lucy, Charlotte. Hi. And firstly, I just want to let you know I also have my coffee.
Fantastic.
Nice to see you.
That's great to hear. Thank you for bringing your coffee. Not everybody thinks about this when they come and join us on the show, so appreciate that. So, Rachel, we heard a very brief introduction from Lucy just now, but can you share with our audience a bit more detail, a bit about you and your career?
Sure. So, as Lucy says, I've been in the healthcare, health tech, well-being space for 2 decades of my career. And during that time, I've had a real privilege of working with a full range of organizations. So some leading global companies, so the likes of Air Products, the likes of Optum, United Health Group, Arjo Huntley. And then paired with that, on the flip side, I've also had the opportunity to work with some startup scale-ups that have really developed and required a different skill set, a different level of resilience, but also kept me very true to my grit and passion throughout that time as well.
Nice. It's interesting you say about startups and resilience, because that's definitely, for me, they go hand in glove from my experience too.
Yes.
Rachel, one of the questions that we like to ask our guests when they join us is really around like how they got into the world that they're in now. Did you always know you wanted to kind of be a marketing leader?
So one thing for sure, I always knew I wanted to be a business leader. So that part was always very, very clear to me. So from the age of 13, 14, what I would do is I would sit on the floor of my dad's study. I would read his management, leadership magazines, books. I would just consume. I was a little bit like, when we say people are sponges, I was fascinated. So I knew there was that internal drive within me to be in the business world. Now, what I didn't know was the part about marketing. What I would say is I kind of took a non-traditional route into the business world. So I didn't go from college to university for a number of reasons. So I went straight into the workplace at a very young age. I think from the age of 17, 18. So I went into the business world, and it was later, and we can talk about that later on, when I went to university. But it was once I started to take that foray into the business world and have exposure to, well, what does business actually mean? What goes on in there every day? It was then that I felt that draw towards marketing, and having the pieces that click together where I could really see the value of what marketing does, how it plays. And I guess it was quite exciting to me at the beginning of my career. So it was kind of yes, I absolutely knew I wanted to be in the business world. And then the part of marketing clicked in secondly, once I'd started to step my foot into the world of business.
I really like Rachel. Oh, sorry, Charlotte. I really like that Rachel's. There is a delay. Forgive me. I really like that, Rachel, you were saying there about your journey, and I think going I've seen a lot of people kind of not going to university or going to university later on. Actually, the wealth of experience you can gain at that young age, because it's a bit like kind of using your words, you are a sponge quite young too, and you do kind of, and I think if I had my time again, and I say this a lot, if I had my time again, I definitely would have gone straight into work first, or going and thinking about settling on a degree. So I really like that you said that. Sorry, Charlotte, cutting my delayedness here.
It's okay, don't worry, we can blame the Wi-Fi. So what I was going to say, similar to what Lucy's just said, but I also really like the fact that you were talking about knowing this from like sort of age of 13, 14. And, you know, you talk about reading your dad's like industry press, etc. And we had another guest on recently who's also talked a bit about how their dad played a part in their career. Would you say that he was, you know, there was some inspiration there from your dad in terms of taking on the roles you've taken on?
I think less so, you know, and I've had time to reflect on this since we spoke about doing the topic of grit and resilience. I did spend some time reflecting, and I think, you know, I looked back at my parents and where did they play a role and how did they influence. The one thing I would say is neither of them, I was blessed. It's a blessing and a curse. Neither of them really said to me, Rachel, you need to follow this path, or you need to take this career, or you need to do this. They were very, very supportive of find your own way in life, but also make sure that you find a way that you can stand on your own 2 feet as you go through life. So I think what they did for me was help me develop the right mindset. So I think it was more about the mindset that they developed, helped me to develop. I also think the exposure to parents growing up. So you know, my parents had very different backgrounds in terms of career choices. So for example, absolutely, I think my dad played a role in terms of influencing maybe my character, thinking, behaviors. He was very much so. Both parents were in the Royal Air Force as I was growing up. So I think there was some mindset pieces that I picked up from there. And then my dad made the pivot into city, into business. And I think, of course, that even though you're not consciously picking up or observing, I think some of that does play a role. But there's a part of it, yes, but I think I was very, very clear and very strong in my own mind in terms of what I did want. So I think the parents have played the part. If we talk about grit and resilience, I think they've played the part of being my very strong support network, but not really dictating or pushing me in any direction that wasn't where I wanted to go. So I'm 100% responsible for the choices I've made today and where I'm currently sitting in my career.
Nice. I can relate to a lot of what you've said, and certainly in terms of responsibility of the choices I've made, and you know, and not having those parents that are telling you, oh, you need to go do this, you need to go do that.
Yeah.
So thinking about you though specifically and your career, because obviously you had quite an illustrious career spanning over 20 years, what do you think, you know, one kind of like key learning is that you've learned over your career? And I know recently, and for anybody who wants to follow Rachel on LinkedIn, published a really interesting post about like around leadership and things that you've learned. But if you had to pick one of those things or something different, what would you say that key learning's been?
I think the key learning, you know, there's so many things I could talk into, so I could deviate in all different directions. But I think the key learning for me was I already had that internal, you know, we talk about the internal flames and fires. So I was very passionate about what I wanted to do in my career. There was no motivational challenges for me. Even now I close my eyes and I see I've got this vision. It's there. But I think the learning for me is if I go back to the earlier part of my career, I was probably all consumed by that. So when I say that, it's about the things that you let go by the wayside that are really important to your well-being. So, you know, it was like that consumed me. So I would work really long hours because I thought that was going to be the success. I would sacrifice social time. I would feel guilty that it's taking me away from my career focus. I probably, you know, was going to extremes on certain things that were probably not helpful in terms of keeping myself healthy, for the long haul, right? Because when we talk about those goals and grit and resilience, it's, we've all heard the saying, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And it's like, how do you keep your momentum and your levels there for the long haul? Because you're going to face adversity, you're going to face setbacks, all of those things. So I think if we go back to what is my one learning, I think it was very much about the importance of taking ownership for my own well-being. You're not always going to have your life in balance 100%. I think that's a little bit unrealistic, but I think it's about making my life outside of work a priority and complementary with also my career. So it's not one at the expense of the other. And I think when I made that shift, and I probably didn't make that shift until in my 30s, but I think once I made that shift and pivot, and some of that was through discovery, working with my career coach at the time, my executive coach, I think that was when I started to realize what I needed to have to have in my life to have a truly fulfilling life. And I think ultimately that will make you more successful in your career longer term as well.
I think what you've just said is so relatable to so many people. I mean, like both Lucy and I like nodding dogs as you're saying this, because like certainly I can relate to a lot of what you said. And definitely for me, when I went into my 30s, like you, I suddenly had this realization of like, I don't want to work all the hours God sends, but I do want to be successful in my career, but I also want the balance in my life. And I think people's priorities change a bit, but it's without detracting from what your career goals. And it's balance is hard, but I think lots of us feel that way, certainly as we sort of go through our career. What do you think, Lucy?
Yeah, you literally, everything you've just said, I was going to say the same. Just as soon as Rachel was talking about that, you and I were nodding, and I'd love to hear from the audience as well, whether you can really relate to what Rachel's saying. And again, it's quite interesting, Rachel, that you said this, because Charlotte and I recently have been talking about this from my own perspective. Like I used to, like you, I used to work crazy hours. Like I didn't have a personal life. I worked in the city, I worked for a bank, I was like 20 something, career. And actually there comes a point where you do need to find that balance, and that balance is so hard. And even I still struggle with it now, because you want to be successful, but you also want to do this and you want to do that, and it is so difficult. So yeah, I really echo what both of you have said, and again, we're really curious to hear from what the audience has to say about that as well.
Definitely.
So next question. As we've kind of already started to talk a little bit about grit and resilience, how would you define grit?
So for me, and if you go online and you Google these two topics, there's so much research, papers, books, everything out there now. I think it can become a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
But I'm going to strip it right back to, basic, simple terms. I think grit is about what we've already spoken about. It's about having that passion, and it's about having real clarity on your long-term vision and goals, and staying for the long term focused on those. So the direction you're going, you're going to get there, you're going to come up against challenges, adversity, but you are committed to that path. And I describe it as I mentioned earlier about the fire and flames that are inside they're inside you, right? It's something that's there already. So that would be my my short summary of grit.
I think that's a really accurate description, particularly, and you mentioned like there's lots of thought leadership about it. And one of the really great books that I've read about it, which we'll share in the comments, is a book by Angela Duckworth. I don't know if you've read this before, yes. Rachel.
Yeah, it was on my notes here. Yeah.
Okay. So similarly to you, she describes grit as passion and perseverance. And I think what you've articulated is a lovely summary of that, which makes total sense. And I think for anybody that's wondering how they can figure out how much grit they have, because you see lots of job descriptions that talk about must have grit, and once you now understand what it is, there is actually a grit scale that you can do in this book that tells you what your grit is, and it changes over time. Do you think that your grit has changed over time, Rachel?
Yeah, I think, I was thinking about this as well yesterday when I was out having a walk, and I think that it's always there. So I think those fire and flames are always there. I think the one thing that, as you go through life and as you go through your career, as we all know, you're going to have peaks and troughs, right? You're going to have times where you've reached a high in your career, everything's fantastic, everything's going great. Then you're going to hit a bump, right? You're going to come down with a bump, whether you don't get the promotion you want, whether you hit redundancy, whether you're not happy with how the role's turning out, whatever it is. And I think, and we've all been there. I've been there myself as well. And I think what happens for me in those times is the fire and flames are there. They might dull a little bit, but it's finding a way to make sure that they're reignited to the max. So it's about not giving up hope. It's about keeping for me, it's about keeping that perspective on the long term. So regardless of what's happening right now or what you might be facing, I personally use that as an opportunity to say, well, what is the gift that I can take away from this? What is the lesson? And what can I take away from this that will contribute to me continuing on my successful journey for the longer term? And I just think it's about the way that you really frame it, and protect your personal grit. So putting a boundary around yourself, really. So the outside influence, what's happening, doesn't affect. Of course, it will have some level of effect, but making sure that your grit is still there. So I think, to answer the question, my grit is always there. There are times when it's stronger. There are times when it needs to be dialed back up or given a bit of TLC, if I've faced a knockback or some adversity, but it's absolutely always there to some degree.
Really, honestly, I wish I had pen and paper. I can't wait to listen to this back to write some of the stuff you're saying, Rachel. It's really interesting. And the next kind of question that we had for you was around describing resilience. And I think some of the stuff you've just said there sounds like, to me, some of those, putting those boundaries in place, understanding that you have those kind of highs and those lows. To me, that already sounds like resilience. But how would you define resilience?
So I think, for me, there's two lenses to resilience. So you've got the organizational resilience, and you've also got the personal resilience. So I think so far I've talked a lot about the personal resilience, and we all have that. But I think one of the things that's becoming more, and I think there's an emerging wave of thought leadership conversation around this, is that organizational resilience piece as well. So when we talk about I'll talk about organizational resilience first. So that's things like the culture of an organization, the values of an organization, the leadership of an organization, the change preparedness of an organization. So it's about that whole ecosystem. And then if we look on the flip side of that, you've got the individual resilience. So that's things like confidence, communication, competence, coping mechanisms, character. So you've got those two different lenses to look at things. And for me, my resilience is, of course, I still work on it continuously. I don't think anyone's ever a finished product, but I think I have quite a high level of resilience. But I think it's also important to look at the ecosystem in which you're in. So, for example, depending on the organization you're in, how you can perform will not just depend, I believe, and this is my personal view, it won't just depend on your personal resilience. It will also depend on that ecosystem in which you're trying to operate in. Because if we look at some of the things we've spoken about, so whether it be the leadership, whether it be the system thinking, whether it be the culture and values, they play a huge part on influencing the level of resilience that you're going to need to survive and thrive in that organization. So I think there's the two lenses definitely to look at. I often stop and look at myself. So in terms of the 6 that I related to the personal resilience, I will always look at myself and say, okay, where do I need to work on some of these things? Am I in an ecosystem where maybe I'm struggling, or maybe some of these things are not working for me, or in environments where I'm thriving? What is it that's really helping me to thrive here? And a lot of the times for me, it's a balance of the two. I think the organizational resilience and the personal resilience are interconnected. So I've always found myself thriving in environments where it's had a very strong culture, where it's had very strong values, where there's been very, very very, very talented leadership. So I think, and the ecosystem, you know, what are the decision-making routes? How fair are some of the processes and practices? So it's a balance of the two. I think when we look at resilience, it's about looking through those two lenses. And if I just add on to that, I went to a conference, I think it was about a year or so ago in London. It was the REBA conference. So that's Rewards and Employee Benefits Association. Very much talking into that workplace well-being. I sat in a talk and it was all about resilience. So I found it fascinating. But one of the things that came out of that was, you know, and you might see it yourselves, lots of companies or institutions bring in these how to be resilient one-day workshops. So they'll sit people in a room, sit them all down, talk about how to be resilient, give them top 10 tips, or these are the things you need to do, and away you go. The results have shown time and time again that that's very, very limited in effectiveness. And the reason why is it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is it's because you're not really digging deep into the ecosystem. And you're not asking the question, why do we need our people to be more resilient? What is it that's currently causing a challenge or needing them to have a higher level of personal resilience? Because, you know, we've all got some level of resilience within us. So I think that was fascinating for me to sit in and start to look through the two different lenses of resilience.
I think a lot of what you've said is really interesting, particularly around the course piece. I mean, Lucy's heard me say similar things before about courses. They're, you know, they're a foundation. They're not going to give you that silver bullet that's going to make you like 100% resilient. And as you said, and as I quite agree with, no one is 100% resilient. It's something you've got to constantly work at, which I guess kind of then leads on to sort of the next question I had, which is, you know, why do you think it's important to keep I use the word training, but hopefully you're understanding the guys I mean it in, but training that I can't even speak now, that resilience muscle, to be successful in your career and in your life as well. Why do you think that's an important skill for a leader or anybody in a business to keep training it? And the same with grit in a certain respect, because it's not something I think that you're born with. It's something that you have to continue to learn and build on. But I'd love to hear your viewpoint.
Yeah, I think if we start with the iceberg, we've all seen the iceberg of success, right? And you see the very tip at the top, and you see all of those things underneath where it's hard work, late night struggles, hardships, all of those different things. You know, and I think if we take that and if we look at people's LinkedIns, Instagrams, Facebooks, and we see these beautiful, you know, stories, reels that everybody's life is perfect or their career is glitz and glam and it's like no struggle. Let's be real. It is a real struggle. We've all faced, and you know, I feel open to challenge me, but I'm sure we've all faced some level of adversity, some level of challenges. And I personally don't believe that the further you go on in your career, they go away. They just become very, very different challenges, very different sets of adversity that you might face and things that you need to overcome. So I think it's really important to be aware of what you may face, those roadblocks. And as you say, Charlotte, it could be personally, it could be professionally, it could be loss of a loved one, it could be loss of a job, it could be financial hardship. You know, there's a full range of things that we'll face as we go through our lives. And it's how do you what's the word? How do you have those positive coping mechanisms to deal with those situations? And I think that's a huge part that I work on quite a lot, is always taking a step back when I've gone through a challenge or I'm facing adversity. Am I using positive coping skills to deal with that? Are my habits healthy? So how am I handling my stress? And I think that's something that I've worked on throughout my career and experimented with. So sometimes it might be that exercise helps me. Sometimes it might be going and doing a challenging hike. Sometimes it might be just spending time at home with my husband. Sometimes it might be having friends around for a dinner or a trip away. So it's like understanding, and we're not all the same. So there's no point me saying, okay, this is what you need to do to be resilient, because that might not work for you, Lucy, and that might not work for you. But I do believe it's something very important to really hone in. And if you can get that part right, if you can build your resilience, what that's going to do for you over time is that's going to help you first to be healthier. It's going to help you get through challenging situations. You're going to strengthen your bounce back factor. And what you see with resilient people is they usually come out of adversity stronger. So it's that growth, right? You see that growth. It's not always easy to see. If I look back on my career, and I actually did this with a coach once, we mapped out my last 2 decades and looked at the experiences and where did I experience the biggest growth. And it was in periods where I'd had a real challenging time or a setback, and I hadn't let that defeat me, but I'd used that as a trampoline to really build on, bounce back. But it might not have been visible in my career for 2 or 3 years later, but it's there. So it's having that, I think mindset is really important, coping mechanisms, continuing to evolve those. And the one thing which I've had to learn to get better at is asking for help. I think that's something that, you're making yourself vulnerable. You're having to go out of your way. You're having to admit to yourself that you actually need some help, outside help, as well.
Rachel, there's a few things that you've said there, which I wanted just to kind of almost re-say just for the audience, really. And you've mentioned a couple of times about working with a coach, and I really do think that there is a benefit there. So if you do feel like you want to work on your resilience, or you want to work on, your grit, or something like that, definitely go and find a coach that can help you, a qualified coach ideally, but I won't beat that drum right this moment. But also counselling as well, if you feel like you need to go and get a counsellor to help you with anything too, because exactly what Rachel's saying, you have to, you go through these difficult times. And really, again, please tell me if you think I'm wrong, but I think 99.9% of the time, when you go through something terrible and you come out stronger, that's when that resilience is going to grow stronger too. And then you were saying there about finding those different kind of coping mechanisms as well. And you're totally right. What works for me might not work for Charlotte, that might not work for you, Rachel. But you mentioned there about exercise, and I definitely found like just getting out for a walk and I'm walking away for a second, and as much as people are or like sticking my head out the window, which I know sounds really ridiculous, but there's moments where I don't feel resilient or strong, and I just stick my head out the window, take a few deep breaths and close it again. So I just wanted to shout out my little coping mechanism there. And Charlotte, just wanted to get your view as well on what you think.
I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with everything both of you just said. I mean, you'll have seen me like nodding away because I agree with what you're saying. I think I think everyone has their own approach to it, and you're absolutely both right. Having a coach or seeing a counsellor or even getting a mentor to help with these things, I think is super valuable, because they're transferable skills for one. So you might invest in these things for your work life, but actually sometimes some of the hardest things that happen to us where we face adversity are in our personal lives, which then can have an impact on our work life. So I definitely think like it's a worthwhile skill, both having like a good resilience muscle, and I use the word muscle intentionally because you have to build it. And also having continued investment in, increasing your levels of grit, I think is really important. And I think you guys have already said it beautifully, so I don't really have anything further to add.
Yeah. One other thing just to add on this topic, which I think is really important to recognize as well, is resilient people experience some of the same emotions that everybody else experiences. So it doesn't mean those things go away. So they will experience stress, anxiety, grief, all of these different emotions. So it's not that they're protected from feeling those human emotions. It's just the way that they process them, and the way that they work through them, and the way that they bounce back. So I think that's just an important point to call out as well.
I totally agree. And actually, that was the other thing I meant to mention. I love the fact that you talk about bouncing back, because I think that comes back to the thing I keep saying about muscle. Like, it's something that you grow and that you sort of you bounce back from, but actually the next time that you bounce, you might go a bit higher than you did before, because before you were a bit like, oh, I'm not sure I can do this. And I think I love the analogy that you used of the trampoline, and I could really visualize what you meant by that. I think it's that'll be one that Lucy and I'll be like, definitely want to reuse for sure.
Yeah. And I think the one other thing just to mention as well is that I think, in today's world, there's a lot of desire for instant gratification, right?
Yes.
Or immediacy, and wanting the solution right now. The things I'm talking about here are not things that happen overnight, or,
Agreed.
they're going to happen next week, or they're going to happen 3 weeks. So even when we talk about that bounce back or that working through, this is about the long-term vision, right? The long game. And it's about having that, like we say, that desire that you're going to pursue that journey regardless. So it's not about changing your mind every 3-6 months, or giving it 2 weeks. Well, it hasn't happened, or I haven't got my resilience, I'll give up now. But it's about sometimes it could feel like really small steps, but making that small progress every single day in that right direction. It will pay off over time. Just sometimes it could take a year, 2 years, whatever it might be, but it will positively impact.
I think you're right. I think it always takes longer than anybody would like, because we live in such a convenience and right here, right now lifestyle that we all have, and are guilty to wanting everything now. You're absolutely right. People get frustrated and like, well, I've changed this. Why has this not happened? Well, it takes 66 days to form a new habit, for example. Absolutely. But I also, what you were saying earlier about looking back over your career, and I think about, particularly, there's one example in my mind where I'm like, oh, I absolutely hated that. I was having such a horrible time. But actually, if I hadn't have worked in that organization, and I hadn't have gone through some of those things, certain other things in my career would never have happened.
Totally.
So you have to almost be, dare I say it, be a bit grateful for some of that adversity, and have some gratitude for it. And Lucy's probably going to laugh, because usually she's the woo-woo one, not me. But like, and I think, you have to be grateful for that, because again, that comes back to what you're saying about that gives you the ability to bounce back. That felt like a long period of my life, and I hated it. And then suddenly things started to change. But if I hadn't have had that experience, then I wouldn't have been ready for other things that came along later on. So I think you're absolutely right. It's very much a marathon, not a sprint, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
It's given me an idea to give some people some homework to do.
That's usually me.
I know. Just something that, Charlotte, you've just said there. There's something we've talked about in previous episodes as well, around writing out, all of your experience, like from every single job that you've done, all your achievements that you've done. But go back through that now and go and have a look at all of the roles that you've done. What has been really hard, and what have you learned from it? And then practice some gratitude with it. Because actually, to really echo Charlotte's point, and I'd love to hear from the audience as well, there are moments in your career where you're like, oh my goodness me, I cannot see a way out here. How am I going to handle it? And I was in those. I've been in so many of those moments. But if I weren't in those moments, I wouldn't be where I am now, across my career, across my personal life, lots of different things that I do now. I actually am thankful for those moments where I was getting called at 3 a.m. in the morning. And there was moments where, were really stressful. So there's your homework, everyone. Go back through all your work that you've ever done, all those awful moments. What did you learn? And then what are you grateful for? So the last question that we had for you, Rachel, was just around, and I think we've talked a lot about it, but if we've got somebody in the audience now going, okay, well, I know what grit is, now I know what resilience is, and I know all of this, but how would you say that where did you get that grit and resilience? Where did that come from? Where's that starting point for you?
So there's probably 5 things that were really important to me. And I've mapped them down here so I can just talk them through in hopefully a logical way. So the first one, which I've touched on a number of times, so this strong vision for the long term. And what I would say is to give yourself a temperature check on that. So when you read that back to yourself or say it out loud, make sure it's doing something to you internally. Is it giving you that fire and flames? If it's not, is it something that you've just picked off LinkedIn? Is it something someone else is talking about? make sure it's something that's really personal to you and you own it. So I think that's number one. Number two is developing and maintaining that mindset to overcome challenges and adversity. The way that I've done that is through leveraging parents, family, networks. I also trained as an NLP practitioner, so being able to reframe that, focus on my goals, achieving my goals. So that was a game changer for me. And then I think the third one, which you've both mentioned as well in your career, is like facing and overcoming adversities and challenges. Don't shy away from them, actually run towards them, jump both feet first in, and like relish the experience, knowing that at some point there's going to be a gift in that, or you're going to develop something new that you can take forward to the next step. The other one, there's two more things which you've both touched on as well, so I'm not saying anything new here or revolutionary, but a mentor. I was really, really blessed to have a fantastic mentor called Sherry for the first 10 years of my career. And she imparted so much wisdom onto me. And one of the simple things that she taught me is see the challenges that you see as a roundabout, not a roadblock. So that sentence has always stayed with me: roundabout, not a roadblock. So your career is not going to be a straight road, right? You're going to be going along the road, you're going to hit something, and instead of seeing it as a roadblock dead end, it's just a roundabout. So you think to yourself, okay, what diversion do I take? How do I get around that? What's the way forward? So just keeping that open mindset, roundabout, not roadblock. So having a mentor for 10 years. And for me, the most important part of those mentor relationships is being 100% honest. I put everything on the table. I put the challenges I was facing, why I was frustrated, what I thought was holding me back, what I needed to work on. And she totally embraced and worked with me. She gave so much time. So I think that's really important. And then as I've gone further through my career, I also was lucky and fortunate enough to be able to have some funds to invest in an executive coach. So I did go and invest in an executive coach who worked with me both in a group and one-to-one. So we kind of worked through what does the next phase of my career look like, getting clarity on my values, what's important to me, those kind of things. So I think the clear vision, mindset, really jumping straight into those challenges, mentor, and also that executive coaching piece, and being very clear about they're just roundabouts, not roadblocks.
I love the roundabout piece. What I was imagining is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that magic roundabout in Hemel Hempstead, where you've got the 7 mini roundabouts so you're trying to get off. Nightmare for anybody who drives there. Yeah. But I love the idea of a roundabout. I think that makes things almost feel a bit more achievable in that description. So I'm definitely going to take that forward personally. I feel like I've learned something from this episode. So thank you so much, Rachel. Rachel, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up today?
No, I think we've covered most of the things. I think it's just about really taking a step back and giving yourself some time to really ponder and reflect on this topic. It means so much to people in different ways. And I think it is, like Lucy said at the beginning, it's such an important topic given the adversities that we've all been facing as we've gone through the pandemic and into the new world, and so much change, economic uncertainty. It is such an important topic. So nothing else to add from me. The only one thing, if anyone is interested in what I've shared today, I did recently do a LinkedIn post that talked about my 5 career insights. So we'll delve a little bit more into this. And I think, Charlotte, where you were talking earlier about learning lessons and things, I like to call them gifts. So, take a look at that post if you want, and I'll share on there about gifts, career gifts and insights as well.
It is a great post. I think I commented on it myself, actually. It was very insightful, but I do love that. Gifts, a nice bit of positive reframing there to finish up the episode. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us. It's been such a brilliant episode, and we really appreciate that you've come on and given your time and experience. So Thank you very much.
And thank you both to you. You know, I really appreciate the invitation and being here this morning. So thank you both so much. You're doing a great, you know, you're doing something very, very important and giving back in a great way. So thank you.
Thanks,
Don't
Rachel.
just let
That's
me
lovely.
off.
We didn't pay her to say that, we promise. With that in mind, let's wrap up today's episode. So thank you again for joining us today, and we hope everyone's enjoyed today's episode as much as we clearly have. If you would like to be a guest, or you have a topic that you'd like to have us talk about, then please feel free to email us at careersandcoffeell@gmail.com. LL is LinkedIn Live for those who are interested. And also, for this episode and any previous episodes, you can find them all on our YouTube page, because we appreciate it's not always easy to find them on LinkedIn after we've already gone live and not everyone can join us. So if you want to watch this episode again, or you want to see previous episodes, then you can find our YouTube channel on Careers and Coffee. And that, sadly, is all we have time for today. So thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you next time. And thanks again, Rachel.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.